In this talk, I will discuss images in anthropological research. I'll discuss image making and image sharing. I give some examples of different tools, techniques, and methods that I make use of. All of them are with the same purpose, which is to pay attention better when in the field. I'll also address how some of these methods change and transform with the different fieldworks. All of the taken for granted things, all of the tacit things, all of the things that we think we already know, that's something that the camera can help us actually zoom in on and perceive differently. Mostly I make use of my smartphone and the video camera, and these technological tools become like prosthetic devices to me. That means that they help me see differently. They help me perceive differently, and when we're able to perceive differently, we also think differently and we know in a different way. I'd like to give the first example of working with visual diaries, with photo diaries, and I'd like to introduce you to Warren. Warren is a young man. He was 18 when I met him the first time in the South African township of Berk. And Warren is not a guy that likes to talk a lot. He's not super articulate or enjoys being in an interview situation. And what he taught me was that working visually for him, being given a disposable camera and take pictures of his everyday life, was a much more better way to create a space for us to dialogue around what it was like being in his shoes and living his life. So when I got back the first roll of film, there were images of a lot of scenes from Warren's everyday life that I knew well already from having done fieldwork. But there were also images of places that I hadn't seen and situations that I hadn't been in with Warren that were more private, intimate, and simply spaces that I hadn't paid attention to. So there were images from Warren eating his breakfast with his family, at home, with friends, all of the everyday situations that I knew already. But there were also images of Warren at work at a factory where he had just secured a job after years of dropping out of school, being in and out of juvenile prison, and being dragged into one of the local gangs, the Hard Livings. He was trying to get his life together. And I had paid attention to all of the things going on in this buzzing and quite challenging place, and I hadn't paid so much attention to the role that work played in his life. And that's quite natural, because when I was hanging out with Warren and his friends, not a lot of these guys had jobs, the youth unemployment in the area being 60%. So the joy that you took in actually being in the factory, having a paid job, was not something that was part of the everyday conversations there. But through Warren's images, we could start talking about what that meant to him, and that was just one of many insights that came out of the images. And it impacted me in the way that I did fieldwork, that I started paying visits to the places where people worked and realized one of these blind spots in my fieldwork. Later on, all of the things that Warren had shown me through working visually was kind of feeding into research for a documentary film, a 1-hour film called Berk that came out in 2010, where it transformed into a different way of collaborating visually around showing what life in this area is like and growing up in this area. So that transformed, and we started working with different technological tools to tell Warren's story. I became really happy with working with the very simple tool of photo diaries, both because it's cheap, it's very immediate, and because it becomes very tangible to people how they're actually showing you as a researcher, as the anthropologist, what is important in their life. And I've been working with this method since 2005, and then it has transformed. In 2010, I did the photo diary project in the Parisian suburb of Saint-Denis, and later on, I carried out the same project, the same concept in Blågården in Nørrebro in Copenhagen. And what had happened in the years in between 2005 and 2010 was social media had grown. And already in Saint-Denis, mostly the young girls that I worked with, they would tell me, why don't we just, hook up on Facebook and we can share the images with you there. And they still continued to work with the analog photography, and we still did workshops and worked around that technology. But more and more, I could see how much more I learned from being online with them and dialoguing in this new media. So pay attention to that infrastructure also would be my advice always, and learn from the field. So I had to also transform and transfigure my techniques and the tools that I worked with visually. Then in Blågården, I was even more challenged, and people were quite upset that they couldn't use the photographs that they had taken with their phones. And increasingly, the cameras that the smartphones had, it became better and better, and people really enjoyed working with the very intuitive editing tools and having more say in terms of framing and making better images and presenting yourself and your diary in the way that you would like to. So that was something that played into the next iteration of fieldwork that I did in Blågården. With these different images, the image making, there's also the aspect of image sharing. And in this example, the photo diaries from young people in Berk in South Africa and young people in Saint-Denis north of Paris and young people in Blågården, they actually came into dialogue with each other through people looking at each other's pictures, discussing differences and similarities between these urban areas, the different everyday lives and the different stereotypes that they were struggling with. And then it ended up becoming an exhibition, and these images being shared in a different way with a different audience. So that's one infrastructure that images allows for. It's another kind of feedback that images allows for, and different conversations that are afforded. Another thing that happened was the insistence from the technological development and how people were using the image making and editing tools of smartphones. So what I learned from the young women I worked with in Blågården was how important this was in their everyday communication, in their everyday life. So in my next research project, I took this very seriously, and the inquiry was built around smartphones and what smartphones afford for young women, young Muslim women of the second generation in Copenhagen, that navigate an everyday life across different sets of expectations, different values, different norms, and focusing on images and communication in images. For example, the app Snapchat, which is a photo and messaging application. In that app, there is a function called My Story. And compared to the analog photo diaries with disposable cameras, this is a different kind of diary, obviously, because I'm not the sole audience. This is a diary that is made by people for their friends or for whoever follows them. For me as a researcher, this was interesting to be allowed to use this as a diary and allowed to take screenshots of images, videos, etc., whereas usually in the app, an image will cease to exist after 10 seconds. But I was allowed to retain these images to be able to analyze them and look them over. So this became a different kind of diary that said as much about people's wishes in terms of self-representation and communication in this flow of images. Working with photo diaries is a very simple tool and very effective in terms of collaborative image making. It's a way of working with people that creates a space that is on their turf in a way where they can visually help you pay attention to places, spaces, people, phenomena that are important in their life and that you might have missed. So they help zoom in and pay attention. In terms of image sharing, working with photo diaries and working with images also has the advantage that it speaks to people, so it can facilitate different kinds of conversations and different kinds of feedback, both from the people that have been involved in the specific project and across a larger audience. I would like to share a micro moment where the video camera helped me zoom in on a specific reaction in an informant, a woman named Mariam. And she was part of my research in Blågården in Copenhagen, where I worked with young Muslim women of the second generation. And in this situation, we're sitting in an apartment and the curtains are closed and there's a really good atmosphere in the living room where we're sitting in two large leather sofas. And we're 5 women going into the kitchen, getting more food, sitting and chatting, and both in the sofa and on the table there are smartphones lying around that are beeping when a message or a notification is on the screen. And I'm sitting opposite Mariam when she comes in from the kitchen and sits in the sofa, and her phone buzzes and she picks up the phone and looks at it. And because of my camera being zoomed in very close on Mariam's face and the upper chest, I can see how her facial expression changes and how her breathing starts becoming heavier as she reacts to this text reading it. And at the same time, everyone else in the room continues with the chatting and laughing and so on without paying attention. There's a reality show on TV that no one's really watching. But because of the camera, I'm so focused on this reaction that Mariam has to the message that she receives. And that's courtesy of the technological equipment, sitting with my camera in the situation. And this is just one small moment that allowed me to later speak to Mariam about what happens when you receive a message from someone special, obviously, that gives you this kind of reaction. And on camera, she quickly closes the screen when she has replied to the message and puts it back on the table. This micro moment allowed for a range of different insights. First of all, it allowed for discussions between Mariam and me around the fact that she had received this text message that she reacted to from a love relation, somebody that she had only known in a platonic way, but that she hoped would maybe become her husband. And all of the reasons why this needed to be secret until it was at a different stage. It also allowed for a lot of discussions around what can be shown on camera, what needs to be concealed in a culturally appropriate way, and what can be revealed and to what audiences. In this situation, in the living room, sitting in a private room, in a private home, none of the women were wearing their hijab and they were in very casual clothes. And I was allowed to record this, but I couldn't share this footage broadly. This led to other discussions around how we could create some alternative filming strategies to actually show to a broader audience some of all of these spaces where the women I worked with live out their lives and have fun, and that contradict the stereotypical image that they feel that a lot of the Danes in the broader population hold about Muslim women that go veiled in public. When visually sorting all of these different kinds of material, from the analog pictures from the disposable cameras to images that people have shared with me in different social media platforms, to my own video footage and people's own small videos that they have shared with me through their smartphone, I have different techniques that I apply in analyzing, in starting to sort and make sense of this material that is in different modalities. One of the things that I do is to put it in different folders, that I start giving names according to themes. And in this, I try to pay attention to also the actual infrastructure of the flow of these images. How did they come about? What technologies were they made with, and what technologies were they shared with? And that's part of the larger analysis. It's part of the framing of how this knowledge has been generated. So when you have your different folders and themes, slowly patterns start to emerge when you see the images next to each other. And all of this is a sorting of a logical kind that bears some resemblance to analyzing your material from interviews or observations, all of your written notes. But then the images also allows for, or even invites for, doing different things in the next iteration of analysis, of sorting your material. And this is what Marcus and Fisher has called defamiliarization. You've started familiarizing yourself with your material, and you have made some themes, and you start to see patterns. And now it's time to challenge yourself. And you can do this in working with still images, in doing collages, and trying to juxtapose images and see how looking at them and sorting them this way opens up for different kinds of understandings of your material. If you work in moving images, doing montages, making sequences that make sense in different ways, adding sound, trying to get at an atmosphere that was in the field, but that maybe you haven't quite put into words or grasped yet, but you have a hunch that there's something there. This process of visually sorting in different ways can help you gain new insights. And another advantage of visual sorting in this way is that when you give form to it, you can then present it to an audience, be it colleagues or the people that you have worked with, or even a broader audience. And with the feedback that you get on these visual representations, or the first draft or iterations, you can do the next iteration of analysis and try out different ways of getting the material in a conversation with other kinds of material in different modalities, in ways that continually challenge your initial analysis. And what this allows for is a kind of avoiding a premature analytical closure. So again, all of these tools are really about helping us to pay attention, both to the immediate analysis that happens when we're in the field, and to the analysis at the desk when we're back.